There was a massive anti-government protest in Mexico. A large-scale anti-government protest broke out in Mexico City, the capital of Mexico. They protested in the streets against the Mexican government's strong drug cartel ties. Believing that the Mexican government has no intention of cracking down on drug cartels, they are demanding that the government take action against the cartels. The scale of this protest is gradually growing. President Trump is considering airstrikes against Mexican cartels, increasing the urgency. Let's examine this issue today. On November 16th, a major anti-government protest occurred in Mexico City. Mexico City police reported at least 120 injuries from the anti-government protest. Luckily, no one died, but over 100 police officers were injured in the massive protest, where tear gas was used in multiple areas. The police tried to control the protesters with shields and batons, but it wasn't enough. Generation Z led these protests as they did in previous Nepal protests. As protests in Mexico grew, demonstrations spread to over 50 cities nationwide. These protests in Mexico began after the death of Uruapan's mayor, Carlos Manzo. Carlos Manzo was determined to eradicate the cartels. He cared about people and was respected by many. Uruapan is one of Mexico's top agricultural cities, famous for avocados. But the issue was that cartels, which constantly exploited avocado farmers, were deeply rooted there. In the past, mayors either feared the cartels or took bribes, so they didn't address these issues. But this time, Mayor Carlos Manzo was different. Despite cartel threats, he wore a bulletproof vest and insisted on dealing with the cartels firmly. But this person was assassinated by the cartel. He always prioritized citizens and was highly respected, but when the cartel assassinated him, as a result, many people became enraged. After Mayor Manzo was assassinated, the Mexican government expressed regret, but their lack of action further outraged the public. Cartel assassinations targeting politicians have happened often worldwide, but each time, the Mexican government couldn't take any significant action due to its collusion with the cartels. This time, however, things were a bit different. Mayor Carlos Manzo's assassination enraged the public, sparking intense street protests. At the protest, demonstrators waved banners saying, "I am Carlos Manzo." Protesters wore cowboy hats like Mayor Carlos Manzo to show solidarity. Mexico News. Police arrested 20 protesters during violent demonstrations, but were pushed back by the large crowd. Some protesters got past the presidential guard and tried to enter their area. Police suppressed protesters with constant tear gas, prompting protesters to throw stones. Many at the protest displayed the pirate flag, symbolizing both One Piece and Generation Z activism. Controversy is rising as reports emerge that the United States may consider airstrikes in Mexico. President Trump has called the cartels a direct threat to United States security and is considering all options, including military action. Reports say the United States may send troops and intelligence agents to Mexico. According to a report by NBC in the United States, the Trump administration is already reviewing the details of the plan, and some units have even begun initial training assuming an actual deployment. This plan aims to disrupt cartel-run manufacturing and supply operations, with strike methods using reconnaissance and surveillance technology under discussion. The report mentioned the possibility of aerial strikes using drones, and there is also an expectation that major intelligence agencies such as the CIA will be involved in the information gathering stage. The United States says this method will help stop illegal drugs from entering the mainland, but it may proceed without Mexico's consent. Since it could infringe on Mexico's sovereignty, strong backlash is expected, and some Mexican politicians even call it a national insult. Especially within Mexico, social tensions have already risen to an extreme level due to the cartel problem, so the possibility of United States military intervention is dividing public opinion. Meanwhile, in the international community, there are also opinions that the use of force in foreign territories should be approached with caution, and there are concerns that diplomatic relations between Mexico and the United States could rapidly deteriorate. The United States is justifying its actions as a response to national security, while Mexico is emphasizing the protection of its sovereignty, making the conflict between the two countries' positions even more pronounced. In fact, President Sheinbaum of Mexico also insists that the cartels must be eliminated, but instead of waging a war against the cartels, he is continuing a policy of tolerance rather than bullets, which in effect is leaving the cartels unchecked. As a result, many people are showing even more anger. President Sheinbaum of Mexico, who took office in October 2024, saw approval ratings over 70% and even up to 80% in his first year, indicating strong public support. Recently, support has declined as his conciliatory stance toward the cartels has faced growing criticism. President Sheinbaum of Mexico has made out-of-touch remarks, sparking public dissatisfaction again. President Sheinbaum of Mexico questioned the reason behind the recent protests and, during a regular morning press conference, remarked that it seemed like someone was paid to participate in the protests. She claimed the protests were incited from abroad, which led to heavy criticism. President Sheinbaum of Mexico has firmly opposed the airstrikes proposed by President Trump of the United States. Mexico, as in the past, places great importance on its sovereignty. That's why many see foreign military operations or armed intervention as a national disgrace. That's why President Sheinbaum has stated that all intervention is unacceptable. This also aimed to protect Mexico's political base. Meanwhile, major anti-government protests demanding action against the cartels have erupted. The government was in a tough spot, strengthening the United States' argument. As the demands of the times intersected with the logic of the United States, the Mexican government entered a complicated phase where it faced simultaneous pressure to strengthen its response to the cartels. Nevertheless, experts believe that President Sheinbaum is unlikely to overturn the existing security strategy or shift toward allowing external intervention. Despite increasing demands for a tougher response, abruptly changing military operations would strain both public opinion and the political base. The United States may now use the recent protests to push Mexico for more direct action. President Trump has already tried to classify the cartels as organizations equivalent to insurgent groups, and as domestic unrest in Mexico grows, the United States' tough message could become even stronger. This trend could push the relationship between the two countries into a state of tension, and within Mexico, both the movement to block foreign intervention and the demand to strengthen public security are growing at the same time, leading to intensified political conflict. Structural problems in Mexico are also being cited as worsening the situation. Mexican cartels are now deeply entrenched in crime, the economy, and politics. In some areas, they act like quasi-governments, collecting taxes and controlling security. Because this structure has accumulated over decades, some local governments and police organizations now find it difficult to escape the influence of the cartels. Citizens have seen this reality for too long, so Mayor Manzo's recent assassination triggered their pent-up anger. This situation is more serious now because the cartel is infiltrating key economic sectors. Mexico's avocado industry is a major export with strong United States and European influence. Growing violence is making the local economy unstable. As the cartel demands protection money and controls transportation, taking over infrastructure, international concerns about the stability of Mexican agricultural supplies are growing. In this situation, some analysts suggest that the possibility of United States military intervention is not just about security, but also involves intertwined economic interests. The United States is concerned about illegal drugs from Mexico and the safety of border industries and the regional economy. That's why the Trump administration's messages are becoming increasingly strong, and within Mexico this is being interpreted as increased external pressure, which is heightening tensions. In addition, the difference in public opinion between southern and northern Mexico is another factor that makes the conflict even more complicated. The northern region, which borders the United States, experiences cartel violence as an almost everyday occurrence, while in the south, the central government's control is relatively stronger, and there is greater resistance to United States intervention. Because of this, there are significant differences in perspectives between regions, and there is also a major divide in internal opinions about how the government should respond. This situation stems from long-standing structural issues in Mexican society and is now seriously affecting relations with the United States. Recently, there have been major global protests, mostly led by Generation Z, which I discussed in a previous video. In Nepal and Madagascar, Generation Z-led protests became revolutions and toppled the governments. Several Southeast Asian countries are seeing Generation Z-led protests, which are also spreading to Central and South America. Share your thoughts on the current situation in the comments. Thanks for watching.